Genetics. What can it mean? The ability to perfect the physical and mental characteristics of every unborn child. Of genetic engineering.
Our first true piece of technology. Fire. 100,000 BC. Stone tools. 4,000 BC. The wheel. 9th century AD. Gunpowder. Bit of a game changer, that one. 19th century. Eureka, the light bulb. 20th century. The automobile. Television. Nuclear weapons. Spacecraft. Internet. 21st century. Biotech, nanotech, fusion and fission and M theory. And that was just the first decade. We are now 3 months into the year of our Lord, 2023. At this moment in our civilization, we can create cybernetic individuals who, in just a few short years, will be completely indistinguishable from us. Which leads to an obvious conclusion. We are the gods now.
Humans are present with many, many others from their species wandering around on this planet. As naked apes, we once tamed fire, and afterwards every form of new technology determined our development. Now that we've cracked the code of life, it will not take much longer before we can start to play God.
The big question is what kind of gods we will be. Will we be merciful and wise gods, or will we be petty, vengeful, and irresponsible gods?
With our biotechnology, artificial intelligence, and nanotechnology, it seems we possess all the ingredients to start our own process of creation. But how to deal with this? And what does it mean for our species? Those are big questions.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
I think that this is going to be the agenda for the next century, is that we will be involved in deciding, either individually or as a society, who we want to be. What does it mean to be a human?
But I've only just been born! You can't kill me yet! Stop! Will you please stop? I'm scared!
This is Backlight. Will we become gods, or are we making new gods?
So Lewis and his team improvised, transferring the gene that produces the spider silk protein into a goat. The hope is that the milk from the mutant goat would produce the powerful protein.
What we do is just grow large amounts of that spider silk gene. Then we cut the gene, we splice it into the goat DNA, and we splice it together. Then we take that and transplant that embryo into a goat, and if you're lucky, the goat ends up with a baby goat that now has the spider silk DNA in it.
When the mutant female goat matures, it produces milk rich in spider silk proteins. Harvesting the silk becomes as simple as purifying the protein and spinning it into fiber tougher than Kevlar.
So there was a lot of interest in using it for the military, looking at bulletproof vests for protection in helmets.
The material had incredible possibilities. But the real breakthrough came when a Dutch bioartist concocted a brilliant and bizarre idea. Halila Essaidi devised a plan using Lewis's spider silk to engineer human skin that could stop a bullet.
I have to say that initially I was a little skeptical, but there certainly was a drive on her part to make this work. We provided the artist with spider silk fabric. Then her collaborators actually grew the skin layers on top of that fabric in culture with petri dishes. The end fabric was tested by putting it on top of ballistic gel, and they shot a bullet through it.
Yeah, go deep.
And the bullet actually went into the gel, but didn't penetrate the skin and didn't break the fabric. Basically, it absorbed all the energy of the bullet without breaking the skin.
Imagine zipping up a suit of bulletproof skin, or genetically engineered humans whose skin is fortified by those spiders.
I mean, mice are creepy enough, and this one has no hair and a human ear growing on its back.
Yes.
He doesn't seem to mind that he has an ear growing on his back.
No, he knows he's here for a bigger purpose. But this is a very, very important step in the science, because on the back of this animal, we're actually incubating and growing perfect cartilage in the shape of a human ear. And it's completely connected to the blood vessels, so that it's just like a native ear in a normal circumstance.
In the head of a person.
That's correct.
So when this finally gets implanted in a human, you don't expect rejection, as is so common with new body parts.
Exactly, because we're going to start with the patient's own cells. It'll make his own tissue, and therefore the body will accept it.
Within a year, Vacanti and Langer expect to be implanting their ears directly on the heads of soldiers wounded in Iraq and Afghanistan. But these will not be the first recipients of lab-grown body parts. Already, patients of other doctors have received blood vessels, skin, muscles, even bladders built the same way.
We're doing this for the benefit of society. Isn't that what we want to do? Isn't that the function of foundations? Isn't that what foundations basically do?
The scientists can't yet control exactly what happens to the human cells once they implant them into the pig embryo. There is a possibility that these human stem cells could grow into neurons and accidentally create a human mind trapped in a pig. Do you worry about some of those cells migrating to the brain and the pig developing a human brain?
Almost 2,000 experiments that we have done with the pig, and we haven't been able to detect a single cell going into the brain.
In the future, we have a way that we don't need any animals for this type of work. I'm all for it. But at this stage, we don't have the technology. There's no alternative. There's people waiting in line for the availability of the donor organs, and we simply cannot wait any longer.
One of the things I learned as an FBI agent is it's not that I learned to believe in conspiracies more. What I learned to know is when I am caught up in a river of deception and everybody else around me is being taken on the same current and we're all being taken in one direction, and suddenly one guy has to stick his head up and say, this isn't right. This is all wrong. We're all just being fed garbage and we're not being told the truth. Well, how is it that technology in today's age, our technology has moved forward by leaps and bounds in so many areas, yet we're still driving, the entire world is still driving automobiles that function essentially on the same technology that they have for 100 years. 100 years, and we're still using fossil fuels to fill up our gas tanks. How is that possible? That has not moved forward hardly one iota. I mean, they blend the stuff sometimes, but I mean, essentially, technology has been stuck for 100 years. Well, that's because that's one of the economic factors from the globalists that is so dead set against distributing real energy, which is free energy, which we know was discovered during Tesla's time.
With recent advancements in genetic engineering, the reality of creating your ideal baby is closer than ever before, if you wish. While controversial technology could help prevent a baby of having certain genetic defects, critics are saying the implications could have a far worse effect on society. RT's Trinity Chavez brings us the story.
If you're a potential parent planning on having a baby, you might be able to use genetic testing to choose your child in what some are calling a designer baby. But as technology advances, soon parents might even be able to choose embryos based on what sort of hair color or eye color they want their child to have, sparking both moral and ethical concern.
A Chinese scientist who says he created 2 gene-edited babies has been fired by his university and may face prosecution. Ha Jiankui claimed last year that he used technology known as CRISPR to alter the genes of twin girls with the hope of making them resistant to AIDS. According to Chinese state media, the country's government now accuses him of evading oversight and breaking ethical rules. Gene editing for reproductive purposes is banned in the U.S. and most of Europe.
2 beautiful little Chinese girls named Lulu and Lala came crying into the world as healthy as any other babies a few weeks ago. Lulu and Lala was just a single cell. This surgery removed the doorway.
This is the future, Josie. We don't need Leo's sperm to get you pregnant. This reproductive process is called cloning. No one will ever know.
It is time to show you some of this morning's headlines from around the globe. Portland's Oregonian says there is a first in stem cell research. Scientists were able to use cloning to create human embryos, but the breakthrough comes with ethical questions and fears about human clones.
Since the birth of Dolly the sheep in 1996, scientists have managed to clone about 20 species, including cats, goats, and sheep. Now they've taken a step towards something a lot more controversial, cloning a human. What the scientists have done is created a human embryonic clone. They start by taking a human egg, take out the nucleus, and then they take a skin cell from a patient, take the skin cell and put it into this denucleated egg. The skin cell that's been transferred is sort of the software, and the egg acts like a hardware, and the hardware essentially boots up the software and creates an embryonic clone. From the embryonic clone, the scientists can derive other stem cells and go on to make heart tissue or nerve tissue or any other tissue that goes on to make a person.
"5 years from now, I may very well be back on this stage with the real deal. Because right now, a team of geneticists at Harvard, run by a narcoleptic dyslexic genius named Dr. George Church, are on the verge of bringing back the woolly mammoth. I know that sounds crazy, but crazier than that is why they're doing it. They're not just trying to build a Jurassic Park on an island somewhere. They're actually building back a woolly mammoth to save the world. Now, the story of the woolly mammoth actually begins 12,000 years ago. An ice age was ending. It was the end of the Pleistocene era. The world was warming, but the woolly mammoth was doing okay. There were millions of woolly mammoths living around the ring of the world, the area that is now Russia and Canada. And these animals were doing fine, even though their environment was warming, until we came along. We tasted one and we decided they tasted good. Early man ate the woolly mammoth out of existence 12,000 years ago. Most of them went extinct because we ate them. A small family of woolly mammoths crossed an ice bridge to an island called Wrangel Island in the Arctic Circle. And this family that was 500 strong lived another 8,000 years protected on this island because the ice bridge melted and people couldn't get to them. So they were around while we were building pyramids. That's a crazy thought to me. Then, of course, some people built a boat, went across, and ate the rest of them. So the woolly mammoth was gone 3,000 years ago. Fast forward to today, 3,000 years later. The same families, the same relatives of the people who ate the woolly mammoth are now going up in boats to the Arctic Circle looking for their tusks. Because it turns out woolly mammoth ivory is worth $250,000 a tusk. Because this is legal ivory. Elephants are endangered, you can't take their ivory, but you can take woolly mammoth ivory. Once again, the world is warming, despite what some in government might have you believe, and these tusks are coming up out of the ice. So these people are hunting them and whole villages are surviving on the tusk. They're also finding perfectly preserved mammoths in the ice. Some of them come out so well preserved that if you cut into them, it looks like blood comes out. They're sending this physical material back to labs all over the world. And that's where the story comes back to Boston. Dr. George Church, the eminent geneticist, he's essentially the Einstein of our times. He helped found the Human Genome Project. He runs a lab at Harvard. He's 6'5" and has a huge white beard and hair. When he was on Colbert asked him, "Are you playing God because you look the part?" George was sitting in his office when he got a call from a reporter from the New York Times. The reporter was calling because a group at Penn State had sequenced the entire genome of the woolly mammoth. And the writer, thinking that wasn't enough for an article, called George to ask, if I gave you the sequence of a woolly mammoth, could you make one? Now, it's a crazy question. George thought about it, and he realized, yes, I can. This is not Jurassic Park. In Jurassic Park, they find dinosaur material in an amber, in an insect trapped in amber, and then they clone it. That's fiction, because in reality, there is no dinosaur material. We don't know the genetics of a dinosaur, because none of that survived millions and millions of years. But mammoths are only 3,000 years extinct. We do have their genetic material. You can't clone them, because it's been bombarded by radiation for 3,000 years. But what you can do is synthesize it. And that's what George realized. You could pick the genes that code for a woolly mammoth. The red hair, the big tusks, the big nose, a little tail, flat ears, the ability to live in the cold. And these are 23 genes that make an elephant into a woolly mammoth. You take those genes, you synthesize them, and you insert them into the embryo of an Asian elephant. So an Asian elephant gives birth to a woolly mammoth. Sounds completely crazy, right? The question begins then, why? Again, we don't want to make a Jurassic Park and have them rampage through Boston, although Hollywood would like that to happen, but that's not what we want. And this is where the story gets really interesting. So go back to that ring of the world in Russia and Canada. It is now permafrost, permanently frozen ground. That permafrost is a ticking time bomb. It contains within it more carbon and methane than if we burned all the forests on Earth 3 times. Now that is on the verge of melting, and when it does, it's game over for all of us. These Russian scientists, the Zimovs, the father and son team, have been running an experiment since the 80s, whereby they've roped off a section of the permafrost and they've repopulated it with Pleistocene-era animals. Yakutian horses, these are the furry horses. They're using reindeer, they're using bison. They've got a World War II-era tank that they stole off of an army base. They're driving it up and down to mimic a mammoth. And what they found is using these animals, you can lower the temperature of the permafrost by as much as 15 degrees. And you can do this for 100 years. And this is a crazy thought, and the way it works is the mammoth knocks down trees. Trees draw in more heat. High grass actually reflects more heat. They also dig up the snow, allowing the cold air to touch the ground beneath and refreeze it. Then they pack the snow back down, and the snow is a great insulator and also very reflective. So this science is really wild. It actually keeps the area cold. We used to think that the environment changed, so the woolly mammoth died. The reality is the woolly mammoth died, so the environment changed. So Dr. Church, realizing that there is a solution to this one big problem, and the plan began not to make a single woolly mammoth, but to make 80,000 woolly mammoths. And the goal is to take a herd of woolly mammoths and repopulate the Siberian tundra.
A 42,000-year-old baby woolly mammoth found in Russia 5 years ago arrived in Hong Kong to kick off its Asian tour. Her name is Liba. She is a month old and probably suffocated in mud and was then entombed in the Siberian permafrost for 42,000 years. Most of her parts remain intact, including her woolly undercoat and shaggy hair, although wild dogs chewed off one of her ears and tail. Scientists around the world have collaborated to study her using cutting-edge technology to find out why she died and provide more information about mammoths at the end of the last ice age. Liba the mammoth will be exhibited in Hong Kong until next month before continuing her Asian tour, which will end in Taiwan in summer of 2013. Sally Turner for IB Times TV.
Oh.
There is another universe, an unseen world that governs everything we see.
When we go down in size, trillions of times smaller, to the microscopic world, the rules are much less intuitive than the ones we're used to from the large-scale world.
The magic of the microscopic universe begins at about a 10/1000th of a meter, or the size of an atom. Matter behaves so differently at this level that scientists have developed an entirely new set of rules to describe what's going on. They call it quantum theory, and what it says is extraordinary.
This baseball represents a subatomic particle, like an electron or a photon of light, that routinely does all sorts of weird, strange things in the microscopic universe. The subatomic version of this baseball can be invisible, can go through solid objects with ease, can be in multiple places at the same time, and can seemingly go backwards in time and change the past. This means I could throw this microscopic baseball to first base and to home plate at the same time, or change the seemingly predetermined outcome of a play while it's still going on. Now, this is the stuff of science fiction, but really, we know it to be true, or at least it appears to be true in our quantum world. We get all sorts of weird things happening.
If scientists can understand how these weird things work, they'll be able to put them to use in our everyday world, revolutionizing modern computing and perhaps even allowing us to communicate across the cosmos instantly. The key to making these miracles come true is a process called quantum entanglement, and scientists are already harnessing this astounding discovery for both civilian and military purposes.
In quantum physics, what happens to an object over here can instantly affect an object over here, and over here could be millions of miles away.
This is how it works. When two subatomic particles interact, they can become entangled. That means their spin, position, or other properties become linked through a process unknown to modern science.
If you then make a measurement of one of the particles, then that instantaneously determines what the behavior of the other particle should be. And when the experiment is done, it's found that indeed the other particle's quantum state is exactly determined once you've made a measurement of the partner particle's quantum state.
That means if a scientist observes one entangled particle and forces it to spin clockwise, the other entangled particle will immediately start spinning in the opposite direction. That seems intriguing, but it's hardly earth-shattering until you consider that the two entangled particles can be separated by billions of light years. And still, the moment you observe one particle's spin, you've dictated the other particle's spin.
That's weird because it may suggest that information has traveled instantaneously, faster than the speed of light, from one particle to another. I don't understand it. I don't know that anyone does. Spooky action at a distance, as Einstein called it.
You had to know this union scheme was doomed to fail.
Yes.
Then why did you agree to it?
This is what General Apis asked of me.
What, to be executed?
If I had remained invisible, the truth would stay hidden. I couldn't allow that.
And what if no one believes this truth?
Someone already does.
If you join them, you and your entire family will be shunned. At best, you'll exist as pariah, to be spat on and beaten. At worst, lynched or crucified.
Our lives are not our own. From womb to tomb, we are bound to others. past and present.